You are watching The World 24/7 on the NDTV network. I'm Parmeshwar Bava. Here are the headlines we're tracking currently. Republican candidate Donald Trump is ahead of US President Joe Biden in popularity. This is what a CNN poll has revealed. The survey says a majority of all Americans view Trump's presidency as a success, while they view Biden's term as a failure. The big question, though, is Joe Biden's young voter problem now getting worse?
Not a joke. Not a joke.
Columbia University says student protesters who have barricaded themselves inside a campus building face expulsion. Demonstrators at the New York campus escalated their protest over the war in Gaza by smashing into and occupying Hamilton Hall overnight. We are told police have now showed up in riot gear. The Israeli Prime Minister says the planned incursion into the southern Gaza city of Rafah will go ahead with or without a ceasefire deal with Hamas. This just as ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hamas appear to be gaining steam. Canada cuts off campus work hours for international students from 40 to 24 hours a week. International students in Canada will be allowed to work only 24 hours a week from September. Well, our big focus, are young voters in America abandoning Joe Biden? And if so, are they flocking to Donald Trump? Well, just about every US poll seems to show that Biden is underperforming with young people compared to his 2020 results as well as polls at the same time in the 2020 cycle. But the crosstab results of some of these surveys also suggest that Biden is not only losing ground, Trump is actually gaining support. That's an especially surprising result for the famously progressive and democratic-leaning youth vote. Now, according to a new CNN poll conducted by SSRS, Donald Trump continues to hold an advantage over President Joe Biden in this campaign, and the former president's criminal trial as it moves forward. In this coming rematch, opinions about the first term of each man vying for a second 4 years in the White House now appears to work in Trump's favor. This is with most Americans saying that looking back, Trump's term as president was a success, while a broad majority say that Biden's so far has actually been a failure. Trump's support in the poll among registered voters holds steady at 49% in a head-to-head matchup against Biden, the same as in CNN's last national poll on the race in January, while Biden stands at 43%, not significantly different from January's 45%. But this CNN poll was conducted by SSRS from the 18th to the 23rd of April among a random national sample of about 1,212 adults drawn from a probability-based panel that included 967 registered voters. Now, surveys were either conducted online or by telephone with a live interview is what we're told. But results among this full sample have a margin of sampling error. That's a health warning for you. But the findings also reveal that young voters who are part of Democrats' natural base of support, Biden is actually 11 percentage points behind Trump among these young voters who are aged between 18 to 34. This is as far as the head-to-head match is concerned. This is what the CNN poll conducted by SSRS says. Now, for further clarity into these poll findings and the ground reality as far as the political playground in America is concerned, joining us, former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce Raymond Vicory, who's also the Senior Associate at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the Wadhwani Chair. Thank you so much, Mr. Vicory, as always, for making time for us. Sir, now, regardless of whether you look at the 18 to 34 category or the 18 to 29 subgroups that are often used in polling young voters, it's quite clear that Biden is underperforming his 2020 numbers. And Trump's favorability rating among the youngest cohort of voters has actually been steadily increasing.
Well, I think there's no question that the Gaza situation and the protests have hurt the president's standing among young voters. You can't watch the kinds of pictures that you saw just on your video feed of what's happening at Columbia University and not be concerned, particularly if you're a young person and identify with the people who are being arrested or being taken away by authorities. That having been said, it's always the situation that when there is unrest of this sort, that the party in power, the president in power, takes a hit. And I would caution your viewers to remember that the U.S. polls are not always very accurate. In 2016, they predicted a resounding win for Hillary Clinton. That didn't happen. In 2020, Donald Trump was going to be reelected, and that didn't happen. So there's a long way to go. And one very interesting fact about the polls that you're talking about is the large portion of undecided. So it may be that there has been some shift, but between now and November, the poll indicates that there is a very large percentage of young people who have not made up their mind. And of course, what the president's campaign is going to do is to try to remind the young voters of what has been done by this administration in the forgiveness of loans and so forth. So that can change very rapidly.
It may be a long time to go, Mr. Vicory, but you know, the pro-Palestinian movement in the US, today it may be a far cry from the anti-war movement of the 1960s, but the angst and frustration of young Americans is clear and growing, as we can see through the visuals on our screens playing out. Clearly, it extends far beyond their views of the Middle East, as we can see across these college campuses. But Biden's worst issue approval rating for his handling of the war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza yields a 28% approval to a 71% disapproval. This actually includes an 81% disapproval mark among those younger than 35. So in this case, with these tensions flaring on college campuses across the United States, could this spiral into political poison for Joe Biden?
Well, it certainly hurts. But the issue, of course, goes much broader than just the effect on young voters. The two great democracies, India and the U.S., have a very great stake in seeing a resolution of the situation and a stop to indiscriminate killing. And that is a fundamental fact regardless of the age category. It is true that young people are more sensitive to the question of peace and war because they're the ones who have to do the fighting if things continue to go south. And of course, what we've seen on our television, as you have shown on NDTV, is vast destruction in Gaza, far beyond what one would expect in terms of retaliation for the attacks of Hamas on Israel. But it is not the case that it's over with young people. Trump is not going to be able to get away from his own baggage that he has. This is just one court case which is going on now, and there are three others. And there's always a nostalgia factor. Well, we might have had it better. But if you think back, and I'm sure the Biden administration campaign is going to remind young voters of what happened with the lack of leadership from President Trump at the time of the pandemic. So yes, this is a difficulty, but the president is having difficulty across the board. And it's not just young voters, but a part of it is the kinds of economic opportunity which is there, and it goes beyond what one would expect to happen just from Gaza. So I think that you have a large undecided, and while things are not going the president's way now, there still is time. And if India and the United States work together, say hypothetically, and there is some resolution, release of hostage, ceasefire, then the picture can change overnight.
Well, in 2016, young voters helped Trump claim victory by either staying home or choosing a third-party candidate. In 2020, they helped Biden win by turning out near-record numbers and skipping third-party options. This latest poll, though, indicates the erosion of optimism among this key group during this presidency of Biden's. It's going to be an uphill task for Biden and the Democrats to correct this before Election Day. But as Mr. Vicory is saying, they still have time. As always, thank you so much, Mr. Vicory, for joining us on NDTV.
Thank you for having me.
Columbia University has threatened academic expulsion of students, meanwhile, who took over a campus building. And New York City's mayor declared this must end now, heightening nearly 2 weeks of tension between administrators of the Ivy League school and pro-Palestinian activists. In fact, we are told police in riot gear have now landed up at the university's campus. According to the latest details that we can share with you, the occupation actually began overnight when protesters broke windows and seized Hamilton Hall, where they unfurled a banner reading Hinds Hall, symbolically renaming the building for a 6-year-old Palestinian child who was killed in Gaza by the Israeli military. Protesters, we are told, blocked the entrance with tables, linked arms to form a barricade, and chanted pro-Palestinian slogans. At an evening news briefing, though, Mayor Eric Adams and city police officials said Hamilton Hall takeover was instigated by outside agitators who lack any affiliation with Columbia and are known to law enforcement for provoking lawlessness. But a day earlier, the university said it had begun suspending students who defied a deadline for vacating a tent camp that has become a focal point for dozens of student demonstrations around the US expressing opposition to Israel's war in Gaza.
Now, students occupying the building face expulsion. Protesters in the encampment were informed that their participation violated numerous university policies. We gave everyone in the encampment the opportunity to leave peacefully. By committing to abide by university policies, they would be allowed to complete the semester. Students who did not commit to the terms we offered are suspended. Those students will be restricted from all academic and recreational spaces and may only access their individual residence. Seniors will be ineligible to graduate.
Well, this as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed to go ahead with a long-promised assault on the southern city of Rafah in Gaza, whatever the response by the Hamas to the latest proposals for a halt to the fighting and a return of Israeli hostages may be. Now, expectations that a ceasefire agreement could be in sight have grown in recent days following a renewed push that's been led by Egypt to revive stalled negotiations between Israel and the Hamas. However, the Israeli Prime Minister said that with or without a deal, Israel intended to pursue the operation to destroy the remaining Hamas combat formations in Rafah, where more than 1 million Gaza Palestinians displaced from their homes are currently seeking shelter. The Israeli Prime Minister has said the idea that they will halt the war before achieving all their goals is out of the question. My colleague Mohammad Ghazali has the latest details for you.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that the IDF will go ahead with its Operation Rafah. The Operation Rafah is the ground invasion which the IDF has been planning for the last many months to get into the Rafah area of the Gaza Strip, which is near the Egyptian border. And Israel feels that perhaps many battalion of Hamas militant outfit is hiding or have made Rafah as their hideout. Now that has also raised concern among many foreign nations like Germany, France and even US, which has objected or sort of raised concerns that perhaps Israel has not shared a proper plan of how this incursion will happen and how they will avoid further catastrophe for the Gaza residents who are staying there, because since the war started in last October, people were asked to move from north to south, then again from south to north, and yet again, if this operation happens, perhaps the people of Gaza will not have anywhere to escape. Rafah also happens to be the lifeline of Gaza residents, because from Egypt, most of the humanitarian aid has been trickling in since last October, and perhaps if this operation happens, the people of Gaza will not have anywhere to go. And why this is also a concern for the United States of America, because they have been closely monitoring and coordinating of all the operations which has been going around in the Gaza Strip. And day before yesterday, Secretary of State Mr. Antony Blinken was in Saudi Arabia to attend a World Economic Forum event, and where he also started talking about normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And while discussing that topic, he raised that perhaps Israel will have to take maximum caution to not inflict damage on women and children, because since last October, more than 30,000 people have been killed, and as per many estimated data released by the humanitarian organizations, more than 70% people who have been killed in this war are women and children. Another concerning fact for Israel is that the ICC has also, there are reports that perhaps they are also planning to issue arrest warrants against IDF units as well as Israeli politicians. So this has all aggravated into a situation from where everybody is keeping an eye on Israeli army, whether they will go ahead with the Rafah operation or not. And it is very concerning for the Gaza residents right now, because there is complete uncertainty. They are not aware when and how the IDF will start its ground invasion.
Well, let's turn our attention now to Canada. Well, Canada is planning to cap the number of hours an international student can work off campus to 24 per week, beginning with the fall semester in September. This announcement was actually made by the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship, Mark Miller, as a temporary policy to allow international students to work over 20 hours each week expired on Tuesday. A release from Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada says students who come to Canada must be here to study. As such, allowing students to work up to 24 hours per week will ensure they focus primarily on their studies while having the option to work if necessary. Now, this reduction is substantial, as the previous policy introduced during the COVID-19 pandemic actually allowed them to work for as much as 40 hours per week. However, such students can work unlimited hours during a scheduled summer break like the summer vacation. In fact, the IRCC also announced that international students who begin a college program at a private institution through a licensing arrangement with a public counterpart will not be eligible for a postgraduate work permit after they graduate. This measure will apply to those admitted on or after the 15th of May this year. Well, news and updates continue here for you. We're back in a moment after a very short break. Let's shift our attention now to the US, to Columbia University, where protesters unfurled a banner reading Hinds Hall, symbolically renaming a building for a 6-year-old Palestinian child killed in Gaza by the Israeli military. Protesters were told blocked the entrance with tables, linked arms to form a barricade and chanted pro-Palestinian slogans. The Mayor Eric Adams and city police officials have said that this Hamilton Hall takeover was instigated by outside agitators who lack any affiliation with Columbia and are known to law enforcement for provoking lawlessness. But a day earlier, the university actually said it had begun suspending students who defied a deadline for vacating a tent camp that has become a focal point for dozens of student demonstrations around the US expressing opposition to Israel's war in Gaza. Joining us for a quick comment on the current matters unfolding at Columbia University, Nish Acharya, advisor to the Biden administration, also former director of innovation and entrepreneurship for President Obama. Thank you so much, Mr. Acharya, for joining us. You've seen the dramatic scenes play out outside Hamilton Hall. The students, end of the day, are demanding divestment from Israel and the right to stand up for what they believe is correct, free speech. Is that unjustified?
So I think we're seeing where that line is actually blurring. So in the United States, there's a long history of student protests at universities. And in fact, it was really an important part of the civil rights movement in the 60s, the fight against apartheid in the 1980s. Earlier this week, the students asking for a real look at hard look at policy was totally justified. But what we're seeing now is external agendas coming into place. And as Colombia has said, external actors who are entering and actually taking the place of the students. So I think it's fair for the students to protest, but it's also fair for Colombia to want to make sure that it maintains control and safety of its universities. And it's a very difficult situation. The Colombia situation is actually pretty clear, but a lot of other universities, I think there's a lot of concern about trampling student rights while also maintaining safety.
Right, but Mr. Acharya, as far as the latest CNN poll is concerned, Biden's worst issue approval rating for his handling of the war between Israel and Hamas, I beg your pardon, yields a 71% disapproval, and that actually includes an 81% disapproval mark among those younger than 35. The young voters seem to be a big problem for the Democrats, but could this spiral into a worse situation for the president?
No, I don't think so. And I haven't seen that poll. I've actually seen polls that are the opposite, that people understand that the president is in a difficult situation.
This is the one that's conducted by SSRS.
No, that's fine. I'm sure the poll is there. I'm saying there's other polls that have shown the opposite as well. I think the issue is there's a war in place, and nobody likes a war, particularly when you can't control the outcome. And in this case, there's concerns that it'll lead to U.S. involvement. It'll lead to further escalation. It'll lead to an invasion in Rafah. So there's real concern among young people in America. But I think what's the alternative? I think for young people, when they start getting serious about who they consider, whether it's Biden or an alternative, they'll certainly look at it and say, well, President Biden is trying his best for a ceasefire, whereas there's other candidates who wouldn't even bother with a ceasefire, who would allow other regimes to have a larger say or escalate with nuclear weapons or things like that. So I understand the frustration that many young voters have, but I think when they look at the alternatives, I think most of them will come back to Biden. And historically, young voters have voted, well over 55-60% for the Democratic candidate for reasons, and that's the reason why.
Well, Nish Acharya, thank you so much for joining us with that quick comment on the World 24/7 on the NDTV network.
Thank you so much.
Well, in other news, the founder and former chief executive of Binance, Changpeng Zhao, has been sentenced to 4 months in prison after pleading guilty to violating US laws against money laundering at the world's largest cryptocurrency exchange. Once considered the most powerful crypto industry figure, Zhao, who's also known as CZ, is the second major crypto boss to be sentenced to prison. The sentence imposed by US District Judge Richard Jones in Seattle was significantly shorter than the 3 years sought by the prosecutors and below the maximum 1.5 years that are actually recommended under federal guidelines in the US. It was also much lighter than the 25 years behind bars that Sam Bankman-Fried received in March for stealing $8 billion from customers of his now bankrupt FTX exchange. Well, thank you for investing your time and watching this edition of the World 24/7. We'll keep tracking the latest updates for you. Do stay tuned.